The water's slap, a sound so sharp it seemed to tear the humid fabric of the Hanoi afternoon, echoed above the city's relentless murmur. One moment, Lily, my daughter, was a beacon of light, her face radiant with the pure, unadulterated joy only a child can extract from the dancing plumes of a public fountain. Her small hand, a fragile anchor, clutched the bright yellow balloon I'd bought her minutes before. The next, she vanished. Swallowed by the churning, deceptively deep basin, the yellow balloon bobbed on the disturbed surface, a solitary bright tear against the murky green. The heat, an oppressive, tangible blanket, only moments ago seemed to crystallize in my veins, freezing the blood. We had sought refuge from the kiln-like streets in the relative cool of the shaded square. Lily, always finding wonder in the small things, had been particularly captivated by the fountain's cool spray misting her skin. Confined to her wheelchair since a reckless driver had shattered her spine, and in doing so, shattered my world, these small excursions were precious, fragile islands of normalcy in a sea of challenges. I was adjusting the small, portable fan clipped to her chair, its whir a tiny defiance against the stifling air, trying to coax a cooler breeze onto her flushed face. That's when the voice struck, sharp as fractured glass, yet dripping with a saccharine condescension that set my teeth on immediate edge. It sliced through the ambient sounds of the square. Isn't she just wilting in this dreadful heat? The words hung in the air, oily and intrusive. A little dip would do her absolute wonders, don't you think? I spun my body, tensing. The woman was an archetype, a caricature of privilege. Impeccably dressed, despite the sweltering, unforgiving conditions, her face was a carefully constructed mask of solicitous concern that didn't quite reach her cold, assessing eyes. A designer handbag, probably worth more than my entire monthly salary, dangled from her arm like a trophy. She radiated an unnerving, almost predatory blend of entitlement and invasive interest. I recognized her vaguely, Mrs. Albright, Eleanor Albright, a prominent vocal figure in our new homeowners association, notorious for her zealous, almost gleeful enforcement of even the most obscure bylaws and her general pervasive air of displeasure with anything or anyone that disrupted her meticulously curated world. Before a single word could escape my lips, before the alarm bells now clanging with deafening urgency in my head could translate into any coherent action, she moved. Her movement was a study in swift, brutal efficiency. This wasn't a gentle nudge, not a misplaced gesture of assistance. It was a deliberate, forceful, undeniable shove to Lily's wheelchair. The chair, already near the fountain's edge, became instantly unbalanced. It careened, tilted, and then tipped towards the fountain's low, decorative retaining wall. Lily's startled cry, a thin, terrified sound, was brutally cut short as she and the chair toppled over the edge. A horrifying, sickening arc that ended with that gut-wrenching splash, the sound that would haunt my waking moments and my dreams. Time fractured, splintered into a million jagged pieces. The distant, insistent blare of a moped weaving through traffic, the animated chatter of nearby street vendors, the cheerful, oblivious chirping of sparrows in the flame trees, all of it faded. It dissolved into a roaring, terrifying silence that filled my ears, my head. All I saw was that empty space where Lily had been just seconds before. All I saw was the agitated, murky water and that cheerful yellow balloon bobbing, mocking me with its bright indifference. Terror, cold, absolute, and utterly paralyzing, clawed at my throat, stealing my breath. But beneath it, something else surged, a deep primal instinct, an immediate unthinking response honed by years of rigorous training, of countless drills of real-world emergencies. I am Mark Olson. Though few in this new, unfamiliar neighborhood knew it, I was the recently appointed chief of the Municipal Water Rescue Division. Saving lives from water was not just my profession. It was woven into the very fiber of my being, the core of my existence. My body moved before my mind could fully grapple with the enormity of the horror. I launched myself over the fountain's edge, a desperate, ragged dive. The contents of my pockets, phone, wallet, keys, the mundane detritus of daily life, were instantly irrelevant, forgotten. The shock of the cold, surprisingly murky water was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Debris and discarded refuse, plastic bags, fallen leaves, unidentifiable muck, clouded the bottom, obscuring everything. For a disorienting, terrifying second, I saw nothing but swirling opaque green. Panic threatened a cold wave, then a flash of crimson, Lily's favorite t-shirt, the one with the smiling cartoon cat. I lunged my arms, outstretched a desperate, hopeful prayer in the movement. My fingers, clumsy with adrenaline and cold, closed around a small, terrifyingly limp arm. Pulling her up was a desperate, brutal struggle against a host of unseen enemies. Her waterlogged clothes added impossible weight. The dead, unresponsive weight of her unconscious body was a terrible burden. The drag of the submerged wheelchair, somehow tangled around her legs, fought me with metallic stubbornness. It was a nightmare scenario, the kind we trained for but prayed never to encounter, especially not with our own. Adrenaline, raw and potent, flooded my system, a chemical fire driving my limbs. I kicked, clawed my way upwards. Lily clutched tight against my chest, her small head lolling. Every inch was a victory hard won. We broke the surface, and I gasped for air, my lungs burning as if filled with acid. Lily was terrifyingly still, her face a chalk-white mask against the dark water, her lips tinged with an ominous blue. A fresh spike of fear, sharper and more profound than any I'd ever known, even in the direst rescues, pierced through me. But there was no time for panic, no time for the consuming terror that threatened to engulf me. I yelled a raw, desperate sound, torn from my throat. Help somebody call an ambulance. Now the scene around the fountain had transformed in those frantic seconds. Shocked faces, a sea of wide, disbelieving eyes. Pointing fingers, some accusatory, some merely bewildered. The urgent staccato buzz of phone calls being made, voices raised in alarm. I dragged Lily to the fountain's concrete edge, my muscles screaming in protest, fueled only by desperation. Hands reached down, anonymous but strong, helping me lift her small, fragile body onto the hot, unforgiving pavement of the square. My training, deeply ingrained, took over a calm eye in the storm of my emotions. Check airway, clear. I tilted her head back, swept her mouth with my finger. Check pulse. Faint, thready, terrifyingly weak, but it was there. A flicker of hope. I began CPR, the familiar practiced rhythm, a desperate silent prayer against the backdrop of rising chaos. 1 breath, 2 breaths, deep, forceful, compressions, 30 of them, count, count, count. The world narrowed to this single critical task, this one chance. My universe became the rise and fall of her tiny chest beneath my hands. Then a sputter, a small, weak cough that sounded like the most beautiful music. Water tinged with grime trickled from her lips. Her eyelids fluttered, a delicate, hesitant movement. Her eyes, dazed and confused, struggled to focus, then found my face. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice, raspy, barely audible above the growing clamor. Relief so profound it was physically painful, washed through me in a tidal wave, nearly buckling my knees. I pulled her close, burying my face in her damp, matted hair, oblivious to the stares of the crowd, the curious onlookers, the arriving paramedics. She was alive. My Lily, my precious daughter, was alive. The world could end now, and it wouldn't matter as much as this single overwhelming fact. Only then, as the distinct, piercing wail of approaching sirens grew louder, closer, did I allow myself to turn my attention to the architect of this waking nightmare. Mrs. Albright stood a short distance away, a picture of bizarre composure. She was dabbing at her forehead with a pristine silk handkerchief, her expression not one of remorse or even shock, but of annoyed inconvenience, as if a particularly messy pigeon had soiled her manicured lawn. "Well, really," she was saying, her voice carrying clearly to a bystander who was looking at her with open, undisguised disgust. "Children should be more careful, shouldn't they? And their parents significantly more attentive, I would think. Such an unnecessary commotion. A cold rage unlike anything I had ever experienced in my life, not even in the face of criminals or during the most frustrating rescue failures, settled over me. It was a chilling, focused fury that burned away the lingering shock. I rose to my feet, water streaming from my soaked clothes, which were plastered uncomfortably to my body. I walked towards her, each step heavy, deliberate. The crowd, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, the dangerous current now flowing between us, parted instinctively, creating a path. "You," I said, my voice, a low growl vibrating with barely suppressed fury. Every muscle in my body was taut, coiled. She looked me up and down, a slow, deliberate assessment. A flicker of something, surprise, dawning recognition, crossed her eyes for the briefest of instants before her customary mask of disdain settled firmly back in place. "Oh, it's you," she said, her tone dismissive. "The new neighbor, Mr. Olson, isn't it? From number 12, I believe." She gestured vaguely, almost contemptuously towards Lily, who was now being gently but efficiently attended to by the arriving paramedics, their movements swift and professional. "You really should keep a closer eye on your situation." My situation. I echoed the word, a venomous, bitter taste in my mouth. The sheer audacity, the callousness of her euphemism fueled my anger further. "You pushed my disabled daughter into that fountain. I saw you." These people, I swept my arm towards the horrified onlookers, many of whom were now openly recording the scene with their phones, their devices held up like digital pitchforks. "They saw you." "Pushed?" She uttered a brittle, unconvincing laugh, like the shattering of thin ice. "Don't be utterly absurd." I merely suggested she might enjoy the cool water. A friendly gesture, nothing more. Her eyes, however, told a different story. They were cold, hard, and calculating. If she's so unstable as to fall in at a mere touch, perhaps public outings of this nature aren't entirely suitable for her condition. Her callousness, her utter lack of empathy, was breathtaking, almost surreal. That mere touch was assault, Mrs. Albright. It was endangerment of a child. I seethed, my voice dangerously low. "You're lucky, incredibly lucky, that she's alive. And you're lucky I don't file a complaint about this public spectacle you're creating," she retorted, her voice rising in pitch, taking on a shrill, aggrieved tone. "This is clearly an attempt to extort money from me, isn't it? Playing on my sympathy, creating a scene to elicit funds. How very opportunistic." That was it. The final, unforgivable straw. My anger, which had been a raging inferno, suddenly cooled, condensed into something hard, sharp, and deadly. "Mrs. Albright," I said, my voice now devoid of heat, instead imbued with a chilling calm that was far more menacing. I reached into my soaked back pocket, my fingers fumbling for a moment before closing around the familiar shape of my badge. I pulled it out. It was still surprisingly intact, the metal cool against my palm. "Eleanor Vance Albright." I stated her full name, sounding like an indictment. "I am placing you under arrest for aggravated assault and reckless endangerment of a child." Her perfectly plucked eyebrows shot upwards towards her hairline, a caricature of surprise. "You arresting me?" Her voice was a mixture of disbelief and outrage. "You're... Who in God's name do you think you are?" "Mark Olson," I replied, my voice steady, authoritative, "Chief of the Municipal Water Rescue Division. And right now, in this moment, you are a criminal who intentionally and maliciously endangered my daughter's life." The paramedics were carefully, gently loading Lily onto a stretcher. Her eyes sought mine, still wide, with fear and confusion, but she was breathing conscious. I needed to go with her, to be by her side. But this had to be done. 2 police officers, alerted by the ambulance call and the commotion, were already approaching, their expressions, serious, assessing the volatile scene. I gestured them over my gaze, never leaving Eleanor Albright's face, which was rapidly losing its composure. "Officers," I said, my voice ringing with conviction. "This woman, Eleanor Albright, intentionally pushed my daughter, who is in a wheelchair, into that fountain. There are multiple witnesses. I want her processed, fully." The ensuing weeks were a nightmarish blur. Hospital visits endless and draining, monitoring Lily for any secondary complications from the near drowning. Police statements reciting the horrific events over and over, each retelling a fresh wave of trauma. And the slow, agonizing, frustratingly bureaucratic creep of the legal system. Lily, thankfully, miraculously, had escaped serious, lasting physical injury beyond the initial trauma of oxygen deprivation and water inhalation. But the psychological scars, I knew, were deep and would take much longer to heal. Her sleep was haunted by nightmares, filled with dark water and falling. Her normally bright, inquisitive spirit was dimmed, clouded by a new, entirely understandable fear of strangers, of open water, even of leaving our apartment. Our small apartment, once a haven, a sanctuary from the world, now felt tense, charged with unspoken anxieties. Mrs. Albright, it turned out, was indeed Eleanor Vance Albright, wife of one, Lucius Albright. Lucius was a prominent, if somewhat shadowy property developer, a man known for his deep pockets, extensive connections, and a reputation for ruthlessly crushing any opposition. She'd posted bail almost immediately, the sum laughably insignificant to their vast wealth. Her expensive, high-powered lawyer was already hard at work spinning a preposterous narrative of a tragic misunderstanding, a well-intentioned gesture gone terribly, terribly wrong, a complete fabrication. The Homeowners Association, an organization in which Lucius Albright wielded considerable, often unseen influence, quickly became a new battleground, an arena for their insidious campaign. The initial wave of sympathy from some neighbors, the shocked whispers of support in the days immediately following the incident, quickly chilled. It was replaced by a hesitant, then growing coolness, clearly under Albright's pervasive influence. Whispers started insidious and poisonous. Perhaps Lily had been too close to the edge, some suggested. Perhaps I was overreacting, they murmured, using my official position to persecute a pillar of the community, a generous local benefactor. Anonymous notes, typed and unsigned, began appearing on our apartment door. They complained about unseemly conduct, about my aggressive outburst in the square, about disturbing the peace and harmony of the neighborhood. The decorative, fully compliant access ramp I'd painstakingly installed for Lily, previously approved without issue, was suddenly inexplicably flagged for an urgent compliance review, citing obscure, newly invented regulations. It was a campaign of subtle, insidious harassment, a death by 1,000 paper cuts, meticulously designed to isolate us, to wear us down, to make us crack under the pressure. One evening, an evening I will never forget, I returned home from a late shift, weary and on edge, to find Lily in tears, her small body trembling. Someone, under the cover of darkness, had spray-painted a cruel, grotesque caricature of a young girl in a wheelchair on our front door. Beneath it, in stark, brutal letters, the word burden was scrawled. The police, when called, were sympathetic, professionally concerned, but they admitted with a resigned sigh that without direct evidence, without a witness catching the vandal, would be exceptionally difficult, if not impossible. This was a significant escalation. This wasn't just petty HOA politics anymore. This was targeted, malicious cruelty aimed directly at my vulnerable child. I started digging into the Albrights, using every resource I could discreetly access. Lucius had a well-documented reputation for aggressive, often ruthless business tactics for steamrolling obstacles and opponents. Eleanor, however, seemed to be mostly a socialite, a woman who filled her days with charity luncheons and society events, albeit one with a known vindictive streak when crossed. But why this intense, deeply personal animosity towards us? Towards Lily? We were new to the neighborhood, barely knew anyone. The fountain incident was horrific, a clear act of violence, but this sustained, calculated campaign of harassment felt disproportionate, almost obsessive, deeply unsettling. There was a darkness here I couldn't yet comprehend. Then came the anonymous complaint lodged with my superiors at the Water Rescue Division. It was a carefully worded, venomous document. It questioned my emotional stability and fitness for command, given my stressful home situation, a clear, derogatory reference to Lily's disability. It cited my aggressive and unprofessional actions against Mrs. Albright, twisting my righteous anger into an accusation of unhinged behavior. My boss, Captain Davies, a good man, a fair man, I'd respected for years, showed it to me with a troubled, weary look in his eyes. "Mark, I know this is garbage," he said, his voice low, supportive but also official. "Complete and utter trash. But we have to investigate it. It's protocol." He sighed heavily. "Internal Affairs will want to talk to you. They'll have to." I'm sorry. My career, my livelihood, the profession I loved and had dedicated my life to was now under direct threat. This was clearly Albright's doing a strategic, vicious attempt to disarm me, to discredit me, to strip me of my authority and my standing. The pressure was immense, a crushing weight. Lily was withdrawn. Her laughter silenced her eyes, shadowed with a fear no child should ever know. My job, my very identity, was on the line, threatened by insidious lies. The community we had hoped to find the peaceful refuge we had sought was rapidly transforming into a hostile, alien environment. I felt cornered, trapped with enemies, pressing in from all sides. It was during a late-night desperate trawl through old news archives, scrolling through endless pages of digitized newspapers, searching for anything, any scrap of information on Eleanor Vance Albright, that I found it. Not through my own efforts, not directly. Captain Davies called me his voice grave. Mark IA is digging, as you know. Standard procedure with a complaint like this. They're pulling all relevant files, even peripherally related ones, to establish patterns, if any. A pause. I held my breath. They flagged an old case your name appeared on as a junior responder, 15 years ago. Different city. A drowning. Child named Michael Vance. My blood ran cold. Vance. Eleanor's maiden name. The mother's name was Eleanor Vance. The system cross-referenced it when her current married name, Albright, came up in this IA complaint. Davies continued, "It's probably nothing, Mark, a hell of a coincidence, but IA is thorough. They asked if I knew anything. I told them you were a solid officer, then solid now." The call ended, but my mind was reeling. Michael Vance, Eleanor Vance, a drowning, 15 years ago. A dark, suppressed memory stirred, uncoiling from the depths of my mind like a venomous snake. I remembered the call, a child missing in the water at a private lake estate. A frantic, screaming mother. A desperate, prolonged search in murky, cold water. We hadn't been able to save him. The mother, I remembered her screams, her incoherent rage, her devastating, soul-shattering grief that had filled the air heavy and suffocating. Could it possibly be her? The dates matched. The raw, primal nature of her grief. I found an old team photo from that year stored digitally on a dusty hard drive. There I was, younger, leaner lines of inexperience still etched on my face, but unmistakably me. Then after another hour of frantic searching online, I found a grainy, low-resolution society photograph from a local charity event around that time, featuring a smiling pre-marriage Eleanor Vance. Even through the intervening years and the poor quality of the image, the striking bone structure, the intensity in her eyes, the resemblance to the grieving, hysterical mother from my worst professional nightmares was undeniable, a chilling confirmation. This was the first twist, the hidden key to her relentless, vicious venom. Eleanor Albright wasn't just a callous, entitled snob who disliked children in wheelchairs. She was a woman consumed, hollowed out by a 15-year-old grief. A grief that had festered, untreated, and warped into a terrible, misdirected pathological rage. She saw me at the fountain, and in that instant, she must have recognized the face of one of the men who, in her tormented mind, had failed to save her son. And perhaps in Lily's vulnerability and her dependence on a chair, she saw a horrifying echo of her own lost child, her own maternal failure, her own unquenchable pain. Her attack on Lily wasn't random, senseless cruelty. It was a perverse, unconscious, monstrous reenactment of her past trauma. A twisted, desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control over a universe that had dealt her an unbearable blow to punish the face she now irrationally, inextricably associated with her deepest, most agonizing loss. My presence, my very existence, was a constant, unwelcome reminder. The HOA, now clearly a tool of the Albrights, had scheduled an emergency community meeting. The official agenda, circulated via email, was vaguely titled Community Safety Standards and Conduct. But I knew its real, unstated purpose, a public trial, a kangaroo court orchestrated by Lucius and Eleanor Albright, to paint me as a dangerous, unstable agitator, a threat to their carefully ordered world. Their goal was clear: to force us out of the neighborhood, to silence me permanently. Lucius Albright himself, a man who rarely, if ever, attended such mundane neighborhood gatherings, was slated to speak. This was their definitive power play, their attempt to publicly humiliate and discredit me beyond repair. I had to present my side to fight back, but how revealing Eleanor's tragic, deeply personal past, her loss of a child, felt exploitative, almost cruel, even if it horrifyingly explained her monstrous actions towards Lily. Yet her current relentless campaign was systematically destroying my life, my career, and worst of all, traumatizing my innocent daughter. I was caught in an ethical vice. The night before the scheduled meeting, Captain Davies called again, his voice strained. Mark IA isn't just looking into that old drowning case superficially anymore, he said, his tone grim. Given the severity of the complaint against you and now this bizarre connection to Mrs. Albright's past, they're digging deep. They've pulled the original incident reports, every single witness statement, the forensics from the scene, the whole damned file. He paused, and I could hear him take a deep breath. There's something odd in the initial witness statements from back then, specifically Mrs. Albright's, or Ms. Vance's, as she was then, account of the events leading up to her son Michael's disappearance. My stomach tightened. Her timeline. It's inconsistent with some of the physical evidence found at the scene. Small things that were probably dismissed at the time as a grieving mother's confusion. Another pause, heavier this time. And Mark, there were rumors back then, whispers among the initial responding officers, never substantiated, never officially recorded, because, well, who wants to accuse a grieving mother? Rumors about what Captain I asked, my voice hoarse, about negligence. Mark, serious negligence, about her being on a lengthy, heated phone call, completely distracted her back to the lake for a very, very long time before she even realized Michael was missing. He let that sink in. They're even trying to see if old phone records can be subpoenaed or if anything was deleted or altered. It's turning into something much bigger. That was it. The second, deeper, far more horrifying twist. My mind reeled, struggling to process the implications. Eleanor wasn't just a grieving mother who irrationally, tragically blamed the rescuers for failing to save her child. What if her unimaginable rage, her deeply personal and venomous vendetta against me, against the memory of that day, was a monstrous, desperate projection, a desperate, lifelong attempt to escape a far more terrible, unbearable truth, her own profound culpability, her own negligence in her son's tragic death? If she had been criminally negligent, if her inattention had directly led to Michael's drowning, and the rescuers, myself included, had arrived to a situation already far beyond saving, because of her actions, then her entire carefully constructed worldview, her identity as a wronged grieving victim, would shatter into a million irreparable pieces. Her hatred of me, her attack on Lily, wasn't just transferred grief from a terrible loss. It was a shield, a grotesque defensive mechanism against a crushing, unbearable, soul-destroying guilt she could never face. The pillar of the community was in reality a woman haunted not just by sorrow, but by a terrible concealed secret. The community hall was packed to capacity, the air thick with tension, unspoken accusations, and a palpable sense of morbid anticipation. Mrs. Albright sat at the front near the podium, looking remarkably composed, regal almost. A slight, almost pitying smile played on her lips as she surveyed the assembled residents, her demeanor one of confident superiority. Lucius Albright stood at the podium, his voice smooth, resonant, and authoritative. He spoke eloquently of the need for harmony, for mutual respect, for upholding community standards. His words subtly, skillfully painting me as a disruptive, unstable element, a troublemaker in their otherwise placid paradise. He was good, very good. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, my palms sweating. I looked out at the sea of faces, some hostile, some curious, a few blessedly offering quiet, nervous smiles of support. My gaze found Lily sitting in her wheelchair beside a kind neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who had bravely offered to accompany her. Lily's small face was pale, but her eyes, when they met mine, held a flicker of her old, determined spirit. I had to do this. For her. For us. I started calmly, methodically refuting the veiled accusations in Lucius Albright's speech. I detailed the campaign of harassment, the anonymous notes, the vandalism, the malicious and unfounded complaint against my job, laying out the facts without overt emotion, letting them speak for themselves. The room was quiet, listening intently. Then I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had to say next. Many of you here tonight see Mrs. Albright as a pillar of this community, a respected figure. You may see me as an outsider, an accuser perhaps, even as unhinged as Mr. Albright has subtly suggested. I looked directly at Eleanor Albright. Her condescending smile faltered just for an instant. But there are things you don't know. I continued, my voice steady. Things that can drive people to actions they might not otherwise contemplate. Desperate things. Her eyes cold and assessing moments before now held a flicker of something new. Apprehension. 15 years ago, I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing the room in a different city. A terrible tragedy occurred. A little 5-year-old boy named Michael Vance drowned in a private lake. A collective gasp, a rustle of shocked murmurs went through the room. Eleanor Albright's face went rigid, her complexion turning a ghastly chalky white. Lucius beside her stiffened, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. I know this. I continued, my voice softer now, not accusatory, but laden with a profound, weary sadness, because I was one of the rescue divers on the scene that day. A rookie. We did everything we could, everything humanly possible, but we couldn't save him. I paused, letting the weight of that shared, unspoken history sink into the oppressive silence of the hall. Mrs. Albright. I continued, turning my gaze fully upon her, now locking eyes with her. Her composure was visibly cracking, her breathing becoming shallow. I believe you recognized me that day at the fountain. Perhaps not consciously at first, but some part of you remembered. Her carefully constructed mask was beginning to crumble, and I believe the sight of me, perhaps coupled with the sight of my own daughter, who requires constant care and vigilance, reopened a wound that has clearly never healed, a wound of unimaginable pain. I had to give her that, acknowledge the genuine core of her agony. Your actions against my family, however misguided, however deeply harmful and unforgivable they have been, might stem in part from that immense, unimaginable pain and loss. Eleanor was ashen, her hands clutching each other so tightly her knuckles were white. Lucius started to rise from his seat, his face contorted in fury, a protest forming on his lips. This is preposterous, an outrage. But I pressed on, my voice firm, speaking directly to Eleanor, ignoring Lucius's incipient outburst. But there is a profound difference between grief and guilt, Mrs. Albright. A vast, cavernous difference. Her eyes widened, a flicker of raw panic in their depths. The official reports from that tragic day, the case files which are now ironically being re-examined with fresh eyes due to your complaint against me, suggest inconsistencies, disturbing inconsistencies in your original account of events. A choked, strangled sob escaped Eleanor's lips. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. Lucius was now fully on his feet, his voice booming, trying to regain control. This is slander, character assassination. He has no right to bring up such personal tragedies. This is a private matter. Security removed this man. A couple of burly men, clearly Albright associates, began to move from the sides of the room, but the crowd was stirring, murmuring, their faces a mixture of shock, dawning pity, and a horrified, reluctant understanding. They weren't moving to support Lucius. They were frozen, watching Eleanor. I stood my ground, my voice rising slightly to be heard over Lucius's bluster. Those reports, Mrs. Albright, suggest that young Michael might have been unsupervised, unwatched, for a critical, tragically long period. Because you were distracted. I let the word hang in the air, perhaps on a very long, very involved phone call, a call that was later conveniently erased from your phone records, or never fully disclosed to the initial investigators. Eleanor made a sound, a low guttural moan of such profound despair, it silenced Lucius's shouting instantly. The men who had started towards me hesitated, looking uncertainly at the unfolding drama. I don't say this to cause more pain, believe me. I said, my voice heavy with the weight of it all, weariness seeping into my bones. I say it because the truth, no matter how terrible, has a relentless way of eventually coming out. It always does. I looked from Eleanor's crumbling facade to the stunned faces in the crowd, then back to her. And I say it because this vicious, calculated campaign against my family, a campaign fueled by 15 years of deflected guilt and unimaginable pain, has to stop. Now. My voice regained its strength, its conviction. My daughter Lily deserves to live without fear, without being a target for your unresolved trauma. I deserve to do my job, the job of saving lives without persecution, without having my integrity and my livelihood threatened by those who cannot face their own demons. The climax was not a shouting match, not a physical confrontation, despite Lucius's attempts to incite one. It was Eleanor Albright's silent, utter, and devastating collapse. She didn't rage. She didn't scream or deny. She simply crumpled, folding in on herself as if her bones had turned to water. Her face stripped bare of all artifice. All pretense was a mask of such profound, naked, soul-shattering agony that it silenced the entire room, even Lucius. He stood frozen, his mouth agape, his power, his money, his influence, suddenly utterly useless against such a raw, terrible human unraveling. In that moment, she wasn't Mrs. Albright, the HOA tyrant. She was just Eleanor Vance, the mother of Michael, confronted by a truth she had run from for a decade and a half. Mrs. Henderson, the kind neighbor, quickly moved to shield Lily's eyes from the worst of Eleanor's breakdown, murmuring soothing words to my daughter. The aftermath was swift and brutal for the Albrights. The police investigation into the fountain assault on Lily, now armed with a powerful psychological motive of projection and a clear documented pattern of escalating harassment, moved forward with renewed vigor and resources. The reopened official inquiry into her son Michael's death, now taking those old rumors and inconsistencies far more seriously, unearthed more. New forensic accounting, triggered by the renewed scrutiny on all Albright affairs, uncovered financial irregularities. It appeared Lucius had not only known about Eleanor's likely negligence, but had actively helped cover it up. Furthermore, he had systematically, over years, misappropriated funds from Michael's trust fund and a substantial insurance payout, money that should have gone to children's charities as per the trust's stipulations. Instead, it had been used to fuel their lavish lifestyle, to buy silence, and to maintain their facade of respectable affluence. Eleanor's confession, when it finally came in the days following that disastrous community meeting, was not a coherent statement, but a torrent of guilt, grief, and 15 years of pent-up anguish that poured out unstoppable to the detectives. It sealed her fate, and Lucius's too. Eleanor Albright was charged not only with the aggravated assault on Lily, but also due to new evidence of her sustained cover-up and obstruction of the original investigation with child neglect and endangerment charges related to Michael's death. The statute of limitations, usually an issue, was circumvented by the evidence of ongoing fraud and obstruction. Lucius, thoroughly implicated in a slew of financial crimes, obstruction of justice and witness tampering, also faced a battery of serious charges. Their considerable assets were frozen by court order. Their carefully built empire, founded on lies and maintained by cruelty, began to crumble into dust. The HOA, stripped of their toxic, overbearing influence, began a painful but necessary process of internal healing and reform, with many long intimidated members finally finding their voices. For Lily and me, the resolution was quieter, but infinitely more profound. The community, shocked into a stark awareness of the darkness that had festered in their midst, rallied around us with genuine warmth, sincere apologies, and tangible support. Apologies were offered by those who had doubted or who had stayed silent out of fear. Friendships, tentative at first, then stronger, were forged in the shared experience. The hateful, cruel graffiti on our door was painted over not just by a maintenance crew, but by a group of neighbors in a spontaneous gesture. It was replaced by a vibrant mural of bright, cheerful flowers, a community art project that symbolized healing and renewal. Lily, surrounded by this unexpected kindness, began to smile again, her laughter, though still fragile, returning like sunlight after a storm. Her nightmares slowly receded, replaced by dreams of friends and flowers. Captain Davies, with evident satisfaction, quashed the internal affairs complaint against me, with prejudice, meaning it could never be refiled. He issued a formal commendation for my integrity and restraint under extreme provocation. Not everyone was instantly converted, of course. A small bitter faction of Albright loyalists, mostly those who had benefited from their patronage or shared their exclusionary views, continued to grumble. They muttered about trial by public opinion and the unfair persecution of a grieving woman. One evening, a few weeks after the Albrights' arrests, we found a small, wilting black wreath left on our doorstep, a pathetic final act of spite. But this time, before I could even react, Mrs. Henderson and several other neighbors had seen it. They removed it with stern disapproval, and a newly emboldened HOA committee member delivered a firm public warning against any further harassment, making it clear such actions would not be tolerated by the community as a whole. Their swift collective action spoke volumes. The tide had truly turned. The city council, moved by Lily's story and the public exposure of the Albrights' manipulative reign, even voted to allocate funds to enhance accessibility features in all public parks and spaces. The first project, fittingly, was a complete, beautiful, and fully accessible renovation of the fountain in the square. It became unofficially affectionately known throughout the city as Lily's Fountain. The legal process, though arduous, eventually ran its course. Eleanor Albright was convicted on multiple counts. She was sentenced to a significant prison term, not just for what she did to Lily in the present, but for the long, dark shadow of her past negligence and the subsequent years of deceit. Lucius Albright received a lengthy sentence for his extensive financial crimes and his role in the cover-up and obstruction of justice. Their grand opulent house was eventually seized and sold at auction. A significant portion of the proceeds, particularly from Michael's recovered trust, was used to fund a new citywide children's water safety initiative. An initiative I was honored to help establish, dedicated to the memory of Michael Vance and to all children lost too soon to the water, a silent promise that their names would not be forgotten and their tragedies might help prevent others. Life didn't magically become perfect overnight. The scars remained on Lily's psyche, on my own. They were a permanent reminder of the darkness we had faced, the malice we had endured. But they were also a testament to our resilience, to the unbreakable strength of our bond, and to the surprising, heartening capacity for good, for compassion that can emerge even from the deepest, most bitter conflicts. Watching Lily laugh freely, her face bright with joy beside the sparkling, revitalized fountain, her new, even brighter yellow balloon dancing merrily in the warm Hanoi breeze, I knew we hadn't just survived. We had, against all odds, found our way back to the light. We carried with us a hard-won, precious peace and an enduring, profound gratitude for a community that, when faced with a stark choice, had ultimately chosen compassion over condemnation, truth over convenience. The heat of the Hanoi city, once so oppressive, no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it felt like a warm, welcoming embrace.